Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the latest Institute's 60-minute webinars. I hope everybody's keeping well, and it's a pleasure to have many of you with us again this afternoon. Can I just, as I always do, run through a few housekeeping points? Hopefully it helps everybody. Technical issues. If you have any, please check your Wi-Fi and your connectivity first. If there are any major technical issues, we will do our best to resolve those as smoothly and as efficiently as possible. But what I have found over the last 2 years is often if people can't see or there's a poor sound quality, it's often at your end rather than at the Institute's Zoom end. So please bear with us though if there are any technical issues. I can see already that people are populating the chat and the Q&A boxes. I know people like to sort of say hi, good afternoon, they give their member number, etc., where they're joining us from. Absolutely fantastic. Can I just ask, please use those chat and Q&A boxes to post your questions, your observations, your comments, your experiences as we run through this afternoon's session. I have seen somebody's raised their hand, and I have learned from, unfortunately, Zoom webinars that I'm unable to deal with raised hands. No idea why, and maybe it's something I should look into, but if somebody's got a specific problem, you can message me individually without messaging the whole group. So if there are any problems, please do send me a message, Jonathan Barber, through either the chat or the Q&A facility. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will share the recording with all attendees within the next 24 to 48 hours. So just some housekeeping, but please do use the chat and the Q&A facility. Can I welcome back today's speaker, Richard Sims of FA Sims. Richard, I'm sure, is very well known to a good number of members joining us this afternoon. For those of you who don't know Richard, haven't seen him, haven't heard him speak, Richard is the Managing Director of FA Sims. He is a Fellow of the IFA, a Chartered Accountant, licensed insolvency practitioner, and anti-money laundering expert. Richard has held finance roles in business, banking, and venture capital, and has seen how businesses work from every angle. This has given him incredible insight into the possibilities for companies to not only survive, but succeed and transform. Today's session is How to Guide Your Clients Through Uncertain Times, Part 2. What I loved about February's session, when Richard talked about how to guide your clients through uncertain times, and what was part 1 was we've come back again today on the 6th of April because of the number of questions, observations, comments that came through. That's what brings these sessions to life. I know Richard enjoys that. I, as the host, very much enjoy that. So Richard, thank you for joining us again this afternoon, and a very warm welcome back to an Institute's event. Enough from me. I will stop sharing my slides. I will keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A box on your behalf. I'll interject where I think it's needed. I know you'll also be checking and looking, but hopefully between us, we cover everything that's pertinent, relevant at the time. If not, we'll save it up for the end and we can run through everything then. But Richard, a very warm welcome back and thank you very much indeed. I'll stop sharing and hand over to you.
Jonathan, thank you ever so much. And thank you, Eva, as well. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're well. Let me put the slides up for you now. Bear me a second. Little technical process to go through. Bear me 2 seconds. I'll get it operational. Start. Now, hopefully that's come up okay. So let's try and get this back in place here now. Let me just find my slide on here. Now, Jonathan mentioned about the Q&A and the chat box and everything. That would be amazing. If you have any questions at all, please do file them in, because it doesn't just help me, it helps your colleagues on the call as well in the chat, because it means that they can think about things. Are they experiencing the same thing you're experiencing? Are they coming across the same issues you're coming across? So it's an intriguing time. Let me just grab my Zoom window back so I can see the chat as well. Just gone out back there for a second.
You okay there, Richard?
Yeah, no, I just couldn't see the chat for a minute, Jonathan. I mean, I moved it across different screens so I can make sure I don't miss that. Because I don't want to miss out on the any chat that comes through or anything. So that's important for that side. So that's perfect. That's good. Okay, I'm going to check back up here. There in a second. Great. Okay, super. Let's check that there. That's great. Sorry, folks. Just be with me 2 seconds. We'll make sure this is all operational. See what's going on. Perfect. Good news. Excellent. Good. How is everybody? I hope you're all keeping well. We join us. This is part 2. We said we'd do. I don't know how many of you were on part 1. So I don't know for a fact. I imagine a lot of you were on part 1. And the theme when it was talking about how to get clients through difficulties they're facing at the moment and the impact of various things. We spent a lot of time talking about the current marketplace and such like. So what I want to do is spend literally 5 minutes just flicking back over those previous slides with a few brief updates to go. Then we're going to get into the meat and drink of what is the actual, what are the options for businesses in difficulty? What are the options for people facing firms facing those difficulties, those challenges? What can they do? What can they do to help themselves? What can you do to help them? How can we find that way forward for them? Because what we're really talking about, as we said many times before, is this leap from a business being where they are today and that business finding a new future in a different format. When I say different format, it may be a different company, maybe a different company structure, it may be through restructuring of its liabilities. Lots of ways to get from A to B. So we're going to I'll refer these 2 points, A to B, quite a lot during the discussion because it's a really important factor just to theoretically think about. And what we can't lose sight of is the fact that point A is, of course, a known at a certain point because it can be seen and ascertained very easily. Point B is, of course, a theoretical point where they want to get to. And the challenge is to work out, of course, the route to get to point B, but also how realistic is point B? What can be done to make point B achievable? How different is point B to point A? And I just want to sort of point that in from there as well. Okay, jumping on the next slide from this side.
Richard, sorry.
Jonathan.
Sorry, apologies. We don't have your slides up.
You don't got them up? Okay, so, okay, my apologies. That now I can see it in here, but you can't see them. Let me do that now. Okay, is that back up now?
That's absolutely great. Thank you.
Perfect. That's resolved those issues for me then as well. That's probably why, Jonathan, I couldn't see that Zoom box. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Good job. I'm glad someone's paying attention anyway, so that's good news. Fantastic. Great. Okay, so on to the next slide then. Fine and good to go. Let's move on to here. Super. Right. Current marketplace. Well, I said we're going to move this through quickly, but do please fire any observations across to me. Anything you want to raise, anything that would be useful for others to see, please do fire as we go, if that's okay. Now, this was from February, as Jonathan said. Now, we've actually seen a huge amount of change in those 3, 4, 5 weeks, whatever it's been in that interim period of time. Of course, we've had the Ukrainian crisis has come through from there, and an awful situation we're seeing there. But that the impact of that is much broader than it may look from that point of view. We're seeing a lot of change, of course, in terms of impact on fuel, energy costs, etc. So, and there's more to come, I'm sure, in terms of impacts and fallout from that situation, not just within the Ukraine itself. Then we've got to say to ourselves, actually, well, what else has changed in that period of time? Well, you've seen this morning in the press, the NI rates have changed, and the tax rates have changed. We're seeing generally in the conversation with people, we're being told prices are going up, not just in terms of cost of living, but prices in terms of doing business, buying stuff, selling stuff, more expensive to get stuff now, causing problems from that side. And so we've seen quite a lot of change in just a very short period of time coming through that. And I think it's almost what we're going to have to expect going forward as well. I think is a fairly rapid set of changes as we carry forward from here. And it is making it very difficult. And some of the things that might have been tripping businesses over from our previous discussion, there's a whole new range of things tripping businesses over as well. And you may have seen the statistics again from the Insolvency Service came out a couple of weeks ago or so about that February statistics, now publishing those largely monthly. So we have seen a significant, in fact, a doubling of insolvent liquidations. So the most popular, if that's the expression to use, form for insolvent companies going through change. So that's doubled up already. And if we look at the kind of the graph that pictures that with it, what we're going to come on to talking about is the different types of liquidation, and in particular what's called a compulsory liquidation, which is one that's done through the court, through a winding up petition process. We'll talk about that again a bit later on, but that's going to change now. If I look at the graphs of that, we're going to see effectively the winding up petitions have kind of come down. This is over the last couple of years, come down to virtually nothing. They're then beginning to start to come back up again now, and the number of those appointments coming through there as well. And we've seen, again, if I look at the CVL, the voluntary liquidation, solvent liquidations there, that's come down again. That's come up much more rapidly, much more quickly. And I'll explain to you in a minute why we're seeing a difference in the voluntary liquidations versus the compulsory liquidations, and that will make sense of that as we talk through. Again, I'll be very brief on this slide. I promise I won't take too long on these bits, but it's really, really interesting stuff at the minute. Lots of changes coming through as you'll see themselves. And I'm hoping these are things that you're seeing yourselves as well, and they are issues that are live with yourselves as you go through, if that's okay. Now, I'm going to touch on briefly on the bounce back and the civils. I'm guessing you're seeing the same situation. You're probably no doubt coming across clients you're making contact with you maybe the first time in a while, where you haven't seen them for a bit, or you've been in regular contact with them, and maybe there's a bounce back loan been taken out without you realizing. How has that been used? Has it been used correctly? What are the benefits of it? Again, we'll touch on that very briefly going through, but I'll just draw you to the very end of the presentation. There's a couple of links at the end of that, particularly to a couple of articles I've written about how we as insolvency practitioners, or how we as a firm have to deal with firms who've used banks, had bounce back loans, and how they've been used, what was a correct use, what's not a correct use, what might be a breach of the use, etc. So again, it's something we won't be able to cover in huge detail in this particular presentation, but again, if it's something that you're worried about or you're concerned for what your clients can do, how they may be impacted, please do have a read through those couple of articles talking about that, and talking about another article then talking about these potential action taken by insolvency service against companies that are not actually going through liquidation. So if a company has been struck off, there's now laws that allow the insolvency service, government insolvency service, to take action against directors, even if the company was struck off, so effectively didn't go through a liquidation process. So it's not an escape, if that's the word I'm looking for. So effectively, liquidation ultimately actually becomes the best way to deal with those situations, because it avoids the unknown of what could happen with regards to those issues there. But just again, there's a few changes coming through from that side. You may also have picked up on get the terminology is correct, is the Commercial Rent Act. Have you seen that come through? 24th of March, sorry, that came through, which effectively is a partial replacement of the specific coronavirus insolvency law changes. So what's happened is they came to an end on the 25th of March. In particular, this restriction on taking action by landlords, commercial landlords, against their tenants. And what is now said is brought in this new piece of law. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, nor do I pretend to know everything about it. But the point is, it's allowing this sort of forcing this arbitration process between your clients and their landlords potentially, or your clients who are landlords and their clients, so to speak. So it's worth you having a quick look at that, just make sure you're comfortable with it and understand it, because that will have a direct impact upon your clients potentially in terms of resolving these unresolved debt claims between the landlord, commercial landlords, and their clients, based their tenants, because that's something that needs to be resolved going forward. The winding up position restrictions gone away as well. That went away again the end of I think the 25th or the end of the month, 31st, I think it was. So that is partly why we've seen this very low number. I mentioned this low number of compulsory liquidations, because of course the bulk of companies couldn't present winding up positions, which is the first step, and I'll talk a bit more about it later, the first step of going into a compulsory liquidation. So again, well, whether we're going to see now, and I'll be interested in whether you're experiencing yourselves or not with your clients, have you seen, what sort of action are you seeing from Hmrc at the moment? Are you seeing your clients being pursued aggressively by Hmrc? Are you seeing suggestions that there are things bubbling, shall I say? Are we going to see a wave of action by Hmrc against debt that's perhaps survived, in some cases from pre-COVID, sat there just kind of gathering a bit of interest? Will they at some point start to untether that floodgate? Will they start pushing out a huge number of winding up petitions? Will we see a big growth in that? And the balance there, I guess, in my view, would be a kind of political one as to whether, in fact, the government want to be seen to be doing that, or whether they feel that their need to recover funds back into the Treasury coffers needs to happen sooner than later, and they have to weigh up the balance between not being seen to be aggressive against companies, but also recovering funds back into the pot. And so it'll be intriguing to see what's happening for Hmrc, particularly over the next 3, 4, 5 weeks. How aggressive will they become on that process? And if you have got any experience of that, please let us know, because I'm sure the audience will be interested here as well. Fantastic, good news, good news. Okay. So you say, as I mentioned, all the COVID stuff now finished, all the support's gone. It's back to normal. I mentioned about in the previous talk this brief pause swapping between pre and post COVID economies. I think we're very much into the post COVID economy now. That was a very brief window of 2, 3, 4 weeks between that swap over. That's happened, that's gone now. So we're now deep into the kind of, let's say deep into, very much into the fresh waters. We're into the kind of how can I describe it really? We're out the shallow end, we're out of the supported shallow end. We haven't got our life support bands on now. There's no more government support there. We're now free swimming in the open ocean, I guess. That's the best way of describing it. Okay. Move on then. What that will bring, what that will bring is change and more change and more change. And I mentioned before how we have, as a practice, putting my insolvency rescue hat on, how we as a practice have changed so much in the last couple of years, how we've had to remodel how we do things, how we've had to adjust to things, and we're still going through that change process. And it is painful, of course it's painful, but it has to be done, because we won't be fit for purpose going forward unless we make those changes. And that's the same for your clients, potentially your practice. It's a big changing, it's a very changing world, and we can only really echo what we see, the clients we talk to, and what you see and what you hear and what you pick up from that. So please do, do think about what you see across that your client base, and the experiences they're having. Hmrc in particular at the moment, the government support coming away, particularly bounce back loans, and then the how they're going to adjust the future. And I guess going back to my first comments earlier about insolvency statistics, I imagine we're going to see more insolvency statistics in terms of obviously more statistics, but a growth in the formal insolvency processes over the next 36 months or so, I think, both because of the COVID-related liabilities, but also this constant hammering that's coming on small businesses now through the increased cost of living, through the tax rises, through the cost of operating, basically, the issues of lack of employees, potentially shortage in certain sectors, lack of employees, and also, interestingly, I was just talking to Jonathan actually before we came on the call about airports, and I'm due to travel fairly soon on a work matter, and he's talking about a colleague of his who'd been traveling, and the difficulty for the airport are coming across seemingly is a shortage of staff, because they're having to take time off because of COVID. So though we've come out of COVID, the number of statistics from what I read is rapidly rising across the UK, and that's impacting on staff availability, from what I understand. And I think also there's a need to kind of recover staff that were perhaps let go at earlier stages in the COVID process. Interesting, we're traveling to the States for work, I say later on next week, and I understand what I'm told by our colleagues there, their mask culture, their isolation, their COVID approach is very much perhaps a year ago, same as we were a year ago. So it's really fascinating to see. And again, interesting for your own countries. If you're outside the UK, what's your module like? Are you in mask still? Are you able to freely move around? Interesting to see. But certainly, what I'm saying is the UK is unique in what it's doing. It doesn't necessarily reflect how the world is responding, how quickly they're coming out of COVID either. I guess for so many other businesses having an international aspect to it now. Big change. Right, I'm going to swing through these slides now. Keep an eye on time. Obviously, don't want to go on too much in this area, and then we'll get on to doing the kind of the details of the processes. Bear with me a second. Okay. So we touched on this. That's fine. I'll just flick over very quickly. We've covered most of this anyway, just in that brief conversation there. This lack of staff is probably the biggest issue for many sectors at the moment. Okay. Talked a bit about bounce back loans. Sybil's talked about. The strike-off stuff I've spoken about in terms of, particularly if you want to look at that in more details, an article I've put on our insights section of FHM's website. That's linked at the end if you want to look at that. I wondered whether winding up positions might keep a higher threshold. That's gone back down to pre-COVID now, so it's £750 for a winding up position. That's the level at which the debt needs to be to enable to present a winding up position. So not quite what I thought might happen, but time will tell, and we'll see how aggressively that changes. Bearing in mind, as mentioned before, Hmrc It's their most likely route to recover a debt for tax debt, basically for a limited company. And they are probably, I haven't seen the technical stats on this, they're probably the biggest winder-upper, if that's such a word, such a phrase, of companies in the UK, because they just have, they're probably their only course of action in many cases is to go ultimately for winding up position to stop that company from trading and to stop that debt from growing. That's the most important thing. Okay, good news. Okay. Right. Now, these bits will just slow down slightly on this, but I've got a bit more pace to come through as we get to the technical stuff in a minute, but I just want to make sure we touch these things as we go through, if that's okay. Many of you will be in different levels of experience in terms of your business cycle, your career. Some of you may be in training. Some of you may have done this for far longer than I have. Some of you may be developing through a practice. There's all sorts of structures and times you may be in your careers and your experiences. And so you may have different levels of experience of what you've come across with clients. I'll make this analogy, and if you've heard me speak on this issue before, this is something you will have heard this point before, but it's like, I don't know if anyone watch rugby football, rugby league, and you see the player, you don't see so much of these now, actually, you see the player running along the touchline at great speed. Someone comes to tackle them, they can't quite reach them, and they just clip their heel with the sort of passing, glancing hand across the heel. That puts the runner out of stride enough for them to effectively trip over because they can't stabilize their leg movement enough and they go flying flat in the face. It's called a tap tackle. That is what happens in many cases for cash flow issues in the business, okay? Because cash flow is a symptom and the cause is the problem. Now, what I'm referring to there is the tap on the back of the leg is the cause. The symptom is somewhere down the pitch, the player falls over, okay? And that's what I'm trying to distinguish here is the difference between the cause that's led to cash flow issues, okay? Because if someone rings us up and says, Richard, really, we've got a problem, we can't pay the wages tomorrow, what we're going to do? That is the kind of the last symptom you're going to come across of a cash flow difficulty. That problem will have started some days, some weeks, some months, some years earlier because certain things happened. We don't know what they are at the moment, because of course we don't know what the client we're talking is, but we have to look out for those changes that will lead to that difficulty coming forward, okay? We've got to be wise to seeing those things and be, hopefully, if you've got the relationship with clients, to have the conversation, say, right, guys, can we have a conversation about it? We are concerned this particular issue could lead to problems for you. And this is all about anticipation, both for yourselves, but for your clients as well. The more we can try and save that client from having to be in a situation where they can't pay the wages the day after, and they have to close down, then we've all done an amazing job. Because although people, and say the insolvency statistics going up and the liquidation statistics going up, that in so many ways is a disaster, isn't it? Absolute disaster. That's businesses that people have put hours and hours of work and effort into growing and developing, and having to close because of symptomatic issues that have come through. Now, the issues will be, of course, what we don't know here is that some of those issues will be completely outside the control of your clients, our clients, because, for example, COVID, big example, or it could be issues that took place, say, 2+ years ago that have sat there unresolved across the COVID period. Now, what we're going to try and work out is there anything could have been done to save those businesses by making changes earlier, by advising and supporting clients earlier. That's, of course, where you and I and all of our teams want to be if we can do. Because what those clients can, you want your clients paying your bills, want to pay your fees, you want to help business develop it. So I'm sure, a bit like ourselves, you have clients you work with, almost like a project job for you. You want to help. You see a business coming, you think, I want to help this client, I want to do what I can for them, and I think this client could do well, it could grow in this area, and that's something you want to do. And then perhaps I enjoy myself slightly more sometimes than I should do. Clients come in, I think I really want to help these guys, and well, what can we do with that? I can see an opportunity to help them, and I'll spend a long time with them. In many cases, so not charges, don't tell him on that, but to help them to realize how they can move forward. And it's a very difficult thing to say. It's almost like just a bit of a project thing, it's a bit of love of life. You can't do that for everyone because you can't do it unpaid, etc., etc. But I'm sure some of you have clients who you feel an empathy for or support for more than others potentially, and you'll do and go as far as you can to make that as best they can for them. So there's always a bit of balance there. And I guess if you're working in a smaller business like myself, you give yourself that ability to indulge yourself slightly occasionally, to want to try and help businesses out more than you perhaps commercially should do. But that's just a personality thing, isn't it? Not everyone has that desire. Some people do, some people don't. It's just something, unfortunately, I'm slightly afflicted with. I can't sometimes get away from, but I do my best to keep the business running as well, of course. We need to understand the cause. The cause is important because, going back to what I said before, point A, point B, we can't talk about point B unless we understand the problem in point A. If we don't know what's caused the issue, we'll move to point B, it will just fall over again, won't it? It will just collapse again because we haven't done stuff to make it better. And I'd like to think that out of these, I talked about these voluntary liquidations, we talked about the creditors' voluntary liquidation, the biggest volume of liquidations we will see as a country and as a sector, that a lot of those businesses will survive that. And I'll talk a bit more when we come to a minute. It is quite possible for a company to go into an insolvent liquidation, a company going into insolvency liquidation, and the business can spring out of there and move forward and survive and continue. Okay. When you think about the concepts of that, so many businesses, and maybe many of your clients are the same. So many businesses are small. And the skill set of the individuals who run and own those businesses is the same. We talked a lot over COVID about the need for businesses to potentially reinvent themselves. We talk about people reinventing themselves, reskilling themselves, etc. But if they've reached the conclusion that the skills they have are the ones they want to go forward with, the likelihood is they're going to be doing it in a similar sort of business, isn't it? They're going to be doing the same sort of work in a similar business. So the more they can take forward beneficially for that business going ahead, the stronger it will be going forward. But again, it's got to be done in a way that's legitimate, legal, process, etc. I'll talk about the process to do so. We're very fortunate in the UK. We do live in a very much a rescue economy, in a rescue environment. The legislation is there to support businesses to survive. And I talk again about this kind of cardboard box that is the company and the business that lives inside that, and us being able to work with yourselves to lift the good bits out of that box and place it into another box where necessary to allow it to go forward. So there's a process to do that. It's not something they can just do, but there's a process to follow to achieve that. But it's achievable because we're in a very strong rescue culture in the UK, that the law is very, very supportive of that happening in the right way. Okay, so don't lose sight of that. Okay. So I said, point B, we need to know why point B is going to be better than point A, and I'll keep those references in there because it's important we follow that through as we talk through the rest of the slides. Okay, fantastic. Pause for breath. Everyone okay? We're doing all right, hanging in there. We're making good progress. We are on really good time, 12:28. We've got 22 minutes to go. We will get this done, guys. So it's good news. I'm very pleased with that. Any questions at all, please just shout out. Fantastic. Okay. So is the company solvent or insolvent? Well, again, I said to you, different people of you, different members of you will be in different stages of your careers, have different experiences of this, have come across this more or less in your working days. So insolvency is very important. This is actually a very, very important aspect here is the technical insolvency, because actually, if I as a liquidator have to go back and review what's happened to a company, the point of insolvency is actually a really important point because it changes. It's the switch for when certain legislation and certain things that we have to investigate and potentially take action against, that insolvency point, that trigger point is massively important. Excuse me. So to understand that, it's really, really good. Now, I mentioned about the cash flow test, which is I'll do it back to front. I'll do the balance sheet test. This is a more obvious one. It's an easier to understand, perhaps, as a discussion point. Balance sheet test is basically when the balance sheet is, here you go, the positive bit of the balance sheet, negative bit of the balance sheet. The negative balance sheet is heavier, is larger than the positive. So effectively, look at a negative balance sheet. When that becomes negative, the company becomes technically insolvent. Of course, when it returns back to solvency, it gets back to a point where there's a positive balance sheet that outweighs that previous insolvency, but it's a question of getting that balance right. But if when it's down here and it's a negative balance sheet, that is technically, the company is technically insolvent at that point in time. Okay, it can recover from that. It says it can go back to positive, but it is negative at that point in time. Okay, cash flow test, slightly more subtle, but in many ways more apparent, I guess, or more. Try this my best look at it. It's easier to evidence to a certain extent, and I'll explain why that's the case. Because it's easier to evidence because it can. If you imagine a balance sheet, of course, is year end. Cash flow test can happen at any point during that year. Okay, so, and that's going to basically show the company can't pay who it's supposed to pay on time. in simple terms. It can't pay what it's supposed to pay on time. Now, that could be as simple as Hmrc, PAYE scheme, month goes by, following month comes up, due date comes for payment, PAYE, it's not paid. That technically is an indication of insolvency. If that debt was then cleared and made good again a few days later because it was an error or whatever it might be, and the company has no other issues to address, and the company, of course, is then is solvent. It can be briefly insolvent and returned to solvency because it's then everything's back to normal again. But if that becomes behind for month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, it's clear the company has not returned back to solvency during that time frame because it stayed insolvent during that time frame. It's important to see that sort of subtlety there. So something like a county court judgment, something like a chasing letter, something like a threat of legal action, they're all going to be evidence on the file showing the company was technically insolvent at that point in time. Okay. Now you could argue that there are lots of companies that live for many, many years when they are technically insolvent because they just pay people as late as they can do to get away with what they want to get away with, and which is fine if that's what people want to do. It's not a business I would want to run if I could help it. It's not a business I don't think of the future. I think people want people to be paying on time. They want people to look strong and to be to be very outwardly what's the word looking for? Look positive externally. Look like they're doing the right thing going forward. So I don't think not paying people until the last minute and getting lots of county court judgments and stuff is going to help a business going forward. It's going to help its reputation going forward. So I think it's important to just look at that difference then. So the balance sheet test, cash flow test. Cash flow test is the kind of lifelong test, whereas the balance sheet test, of course, is going to be looked at every year because it's a very specific file document saying what's the situation at that point in time. Now, of course, you couldn't look at your management accounts. You could look at that as an interim step during the course of the year. Depends how, I suppose, how detailed people's cash flows are, how detailed people's accounts are, how much work you do for people, whether it's month on month, quarterly, whatever you're going to do from that side. I guess with the RTI stuff coming out, sorry, not the RTI, yes, the RTI stuff coming in and the quarterly filing of all the documents. I guess that's pushing you more towards potentially doing more management accounts. Who knows? But that's a very positive thing if you can do. Okay. Right. Just need to mention it briefly again. This last little point actually good to point out there. Once a company is insolvent, it shouldn't carry on. Technically, shouldn't carry on because it is in breach of the law. Okay, shouldn't carry on insolvent. Very important stuff to remember. What we just need to jump back into there, just to caveat that, is during the COVID period, there was this kind of relaxation of this particular part of the law, the wrongful trading part of the law, that ran, I think, top of my head from memory, was I think to the end of September, 30 September 2021, was basically saying that there could be this kind of, it could carry on insolvently on the basis that it was slowed down because of COVID and that it would pick up again later. So it was a small protection window for that aspect of it, but it didn't cover other aspects of insolvency that could be in place at the time. Okay, so just be aware there's a little bit of complication that comes in during that kind of transition period between the two kind of pre and post COVID situation. Okay. So business rescue options. So this is the transition point now. We're talking about point A, point B. I mentioned before, point B could be in a new company, could be in a different company. Point B could actually be a restructuring of the company. The company could still survive and be restructured within that A to B transition. So we could still end up with point B, but actually it's the same company because it's gone through some transition. Now, what we do a lot of work with people, clients on, is trying to help them to restructure themselves without going into any formal insolvency process. So effectively, they're able to do some deals. What we've found, of course, in the last 24 months, we did a lot of work with those businesses in that situation, helping them manage that position over the last 2 years. They've now got perhaps a bit more pressure coming back. Where clients or their creditors, their suppliers were a lot more flexible now. We're seeing a bit less flexibility. They're being a bit more aggressive in terms of wanting that money back. And so whereas businesses have been able to do things informally, perhaps to a greater extent than they were before, that is narrowing down now. That ability to do so is becoming less easy because pressures coming through all the things we talked about 10 minutes ago. All those pressures are on all those people who owed money as well. And so they're all pushing back now. And so there's a bit of a squeeze coming across from everywhere saying, where's the money coming from, how we're paying our bills, we need paying for other people at the same time. Okay. Company voluntary arrangement, I mentioned this on there, administration, creditors voluntary liquidation. I'll just talk those three through as we chat through now. Okay. Company voluntary arrangement, I'm sure most of you have heard of this, the CVA coming through. In very simple terms, it's a kind of a freezing of liabilities in the company. So let's say a company gets their date is 31st of March. At that point in time, anything owed by that company, without a charge it, by the way, so it's unsecured liabilities, is frozen and set against its own separate repayment plan. Okay. It's referred to as having two aspects to it. One is a debt excuse, and one is debt deferral, and one is debt deferral. Debt excuse and debt deferral. By debt excuse, I mean that frozen debt at 31st of March in this example may be paid back at a lower level. It may be paid back on the basis of 50, 60, 70p in the pound, for example. So they'll pay back half of what they owe. Or it may be they pay back all of what they owe over 2, 3, 4, 5 years in some cases, or they may pay back that half debt deferral element. So they're going to pay back 50% over 2 or 3 years to have an element of debt excuse and debt deferral at the same time. So that allows a business to take some breathing space, and it suits certain type of businesses quite well. Doesn't suit others fantastically, but it's a really important thing to have in mind and consider. What the slight span of works a bit on this, and one of the things that slowed down the CVAs a little bit over the last 3-4 months ago is now in terms of the change of Hmrc's position. Some of you have been doing this for a long time will have remembered years and years ago, Hmrc used to have what's called a preferential position in insolvency. There used to be a high level debt for some of those debts ahead of other creditors. That disappeared for quite a few years, came back in very recently. So now it means that some liabilities some funds, shall we say, would previously have been applied against all creditors in a CVA is now going to just to Hmrc. So in fact, the attraction of a CVA to non-Hmrc, so non-government and non-secured creditors, can be less attractive than otherwise. So it's a more difficult sell now to convince creditors, because the creditors have to vote to support it, basically, to convince creditors that they think a CVA is what they want. You can still be in a situation where they might get 50p in the pound, for example, in the example, from a CVA where they might think they might get nothing out of a liquidation. And that's the balance. And the same situation at Hmrc have that same challenge to face themselves, the same challenge to understand themselves. Do they think they want to accept this potential trading? Because their concern, of course, is they've seen that business trade at a loss and therefore not been paying Hmrc over that time. What's going to convince them and other creditors that this is going to work for them? So this is that same transition point A to point B. We're talking about transition going through basically rescheduling debts to allow it to carry on. But if I'm a creditor of that company, and I put Hmrc hat on at the same time, if I'm a creditor of the company, I've got to be convinced this is worth doing. This is not just a bit of a ruse. This is a real thing. Okay, this is a real thing, and there'll be real change taking place. So CVA, I say, a bit more challenging than it was, but the principle is there still, and it's there to be used. It's just a question of having to be convincing about the future changes are going to be strong enough to allow the business to be stronger going forward, and that the CVA presents a better proposal for creditors over than a closed down liquidation, excuse me. Okay. So lots of kind of detail in there, but it's a fascinating process. Again, if you look at statistics, it's quite a tiny number per year compared to other forms of insolvency, but when done, can work really well. We've got a few that we've got running, I say running for quite a long time, so I say at the moment, because they're just, the structure's right, they'll hang in there, and I'm quite sure they'll complete the process because they're looking strong, but they're not for everyone in that situation. Okay. I won't spend too much more time on the CVA at this point in time. I want to jump into some other bits going through, but the key thing here is it's there. It's important that the creditors have to support this. They have to vote to support this. Okay, they have to say, yes, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. Really important on that side. So it's not something that we or the company can force upon creditors, that they have to decide they want to do that. Okay, and it has to work alongside secured lenders at the same time within doing so. Okay, but it can be done. There's a bit of thought, bit of planning, and just don't dismiss it, but just have it in the back of the mind as well. Okay. I think I covered these points off generally, but I go back to this point again. If I'm a creditor, if you're owed money by somebody and they're offering to pay it back, offer to pay you back half, you need to be pretty convinced why it's the case. Why do you need to take half, and why is half better than nothing? And that's what you need to understand. So it's the same thing. So just in those situations, always put your cap on as if you were a creditor of this client and say why it would be sufficiently compelling to want to accept that. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier today, creditors for liquidation, they are, I'd say, by volume. I very loosely use the expression the most popular insolvency form, but that sounds awful because that's not what it's kind of meant to be, but it is the highest volume of liquidations coming through that. And it's a really important part of I guess, your understanding to know that these things exist and the opportunities there. Also having confidence that your clients are aware of the options, they know what they're doing. And we'll talk a bit more as we go through in terms of the sort of psychological impact of insolvency on your clients, but also it's an ongoing thing. They will not be if they're forced to go into liquidation. It's very much a forced thing. It's not something they're going to choose to do because they fancy it. It's not something to do because of, hey, I might go insolvent today. It's something they have to do. It's a horrible place to be. It's a hugely pressured environment, and the key thing is to give as much support to them as we can, as you can as well. Help them understand the opportunities available to them. How do we help them to go forward? How do we help them to get better and to move forward in a positive way? These things like credit sponsored liquidation in particular are the release valves of our economy. They are the think about it. We didn't have limited company status. We didn't have insolvency legislation. How many businesses actually wouldn't actually want to go into business at all? How many people just say, I don't want the risk because the risk falls on me solely. It falls on my house solely. It falls on my family solely. How different as an entrepreneurial environment would the UK be without limited companies, without insolvency legislation? So it may not be the most glamorous part of the business world. It may not be the most sometimes positive environments that you may think to work in, but actually it's a really, really important part that needs to be done, a very specialist part. And that's why, as myself, I'm a licensed insolvency practitioner. I had to take exams to qualify, I had years of experience, and that's why it's something that is specialist in nature and needs to be done by specialists. And that's why I think we can all learn from that. And I think that as you go through your business experience and the roles you do, you'll see how you'll develop, what you'll come across and what you'll meet. And some of you say, well, I've seen lots of these, understand it really well. Some of you may be quite fresh to this, but the important point is to know it's a very specialist area, but actually is almost a necessary evil to allow those initial businesses to start and grow. Very important stuff on that side. Okay. So most common, as I said before, it started by directors and shareholders. So the directors normally, in many cases, we deal with their own managed businesses. The directors and shareholders are generally the same people. They recognize there's a problem. They see this symptom I talked about before, the cash flow symptom. They see that the cash won't be there to make payments they need to make. And all of a sudden, they find themselves in a situation where they need to take some help and some advice. So they come to you to say, right, please, can you help me? What am I supposed to do? And you need to decide then, what can you do? Do you, how involved do you get? What do you want to do? Do you simply refer them across to ourselves, for example? How do you want to get that situation resolved? And the most important thing is that you need to know that your clients get the same level of care that you give them yourself, because the last thing I want to do is see them take a step down. And it's very important they have that, you have that confidence they'll get that same level of care. Excuse me, it's not a never easy conversation to have. It's important that things are explained to them in a very understandable fashion. It's not delivered technically. That support is very important. That initial process, and if you haven't seen this before, you'll see the relief come over somebody, a company director who's under this sort of pressure, to suddenly realize there is an option, there is a way forward, there is a possibility of potentially restart, there is a possibility of taking this pressure, this burden away, and they will grow 2 feet in front of you because they'll just see that pressure lift off. And it's great to have the opportunity to do that, to help business understand the situation. I'm not saying this is making light of people owe money, by the way. The point is, when they've come to us, that money isn't there in the first place. We're not taking money away from it. It's coming away. If the funds aren't there to pay, that news needs to be given correctly and the process needs to be dealt with correctly. and that's what the liquidation comes in for, is used a lot for end of road processes. It's kind of the slightly more sophisticated version of a compulsory liquidation, where Hmrc, for example, or a creditor may force a company's liquidation through the courts. The creditor's voluntary liquidation is the slightly, it's just got more to it. More can be done with it. It's more creative, and more support can be given. Whereas, of course, the court isn't going to give advice to your client about the insolvency options in front of them if they're faced with difficulty. So I anticipate, as I said before, we'll probably begin to see the floodgates opening from the Hmrc position, and we're going to see more threats to warning petitions going through, and potentially more companies going through the insolvency process because of that, as a way of avoiding that winding up process, and wanting to choose voluntary liquidation over the insolvency option, over the compulsory option. Okay. Now let's put the slides. How are we doing for time? Very conscious time. We've got 14 minutes to go. Hope there's the same with your clocks as well, and we'll get this done, no problem at all. So we're going to worthwhile getting to the second half. So a route to restart, very important. What we call start afresh. We use the start afresh service as kind of the brand for this, and it's something basically that is to allow people to legally follow the process correctly to be able to restart a business. This goes back to this box analogy I gave you. Here's your cardboard box company. Here's what's in it. It's the ability to lift out, crane out the good bits, leave the bad bits behind, move to a new, fresh company to allow the business to move forward and go forward and learn from its mistakes. So again, there's point B I mentioned again. To repeat that, point B has to be different to point A. We have to learn from what's happened during that and make it better. That point B can go forward. This is the start afresh approach, and basically there's a process to follow. Okay, there's a very set out process to go through. Assets have to be valued. It has to be it has to be a fair value. It can't be done for nothing. There is a way to go through and deal with that. And our role is to maximise realisations. Of course, in the original company, we do that by getting the best value we can do for its assets, its goodwill, its value, whatever it may be. Whatever the best value we get back, we're doing the best by creditors as well at the same time. So very important side from that to go through. Okay. So I guess your client comes to you tomorrow, this afternoon, and says, we've got a massive problem here. I've got a real worry. How to get this pressure off me? The answer is they speak to you, they speak to us, for example. We have a conversation with them. We get them in a situation where we can take that pressure off them very quickly. In terms of how long to get it formally into liquidation, there is a process. There are notices to give. There are creditors to notify. The point is, as soon as we can notify the creditors can direct their questions, their concerns to us in readiness for our appointment as liquidator. So we can have those conversations. So those conversations are quite difficult between us and creditors. We've had to do situations where we've had to, I've had to ring people up literally when they're about to get on or think they're going to get on a plane. They're about to get in the car and drive to the airport to go on holiday, and I was ringing up and telling them they can't go because the holiday isn't there. It's a terrible thing to have to ring up and make these conversations sometimes, but that level of care we have to give to the creditors as well is as important as the level of care we give to the directors when we first give that advice. It's a very, very traumatic situation, in particular, saying in a consumer sort of situation where someone's about to have a service delivered or they paid a deposit on something. You can imagine it's not an easy thing for them to have to deal with, and we do our best to make sure they understand that we're not doing it. We're doing the process correctly and legally in doing so. But naturally, we find some people are upset about that, and you'll understand that. But that's our job: have those conversations, take the pressure away from the directors in that situation. Okay. So, mentioning this conversation here, we've got this. We need to know in those first conversations with your clients, with yourselves, how the combination works is what's the most pressing point? What's the timeline we're looking at? Are we talking about a payment due in 3 months, 12 months, 6 months, 3 days, 5 days, 3 weeks? You know what I mean? What is the time frame? If we know some time to go at, we can take some time to work on that. Okay. There's a question just popped up there actually from Adeline. So I'm just going to read that through now. I don't think you can see it, guys. So I'll just read it through to you now. Since the director can restart the company again, learning from mistakes, how about the director keeps repeating the same mistakes over the years of different companies, which is unfair to suppliers? Are there any ways for us to prevent the hard situation? Well, Adeline, your question is a very important one. And this is where actually there are several things that come in with that. There are restrictions in the companies in the Insolvency Act, and there are restrictions made by the Insolvency Service. So I think if I'm right in saying this, maybe a second, I think actually, I'll explain it to you now. It's in 1 or 2 slides further down, but I'll just explain it to you now because it's useful for everyone to understand. So first of all, a director of a company going to liquidation is restricted from reusing its name. they can't take the brand and name forward unless they buy it correctly from the liquidator. So first of all, so there's a process to do that to maximize realization of creditors. Second is a report we must do to the government. Okay, that report goes to the government. It's a factual report. It's almost like a kind of algorithm-based assessment that first of all make. We submit that report, and they'll consider whether a director should actually be disqualified. One of the key factors, back to your question, Alan, is that they'll consider any previous insolvencies. And of course, repeat offenders are more likely to be disqualified. So it's unlikely someone's going to be able to go liquidation, and not be disqualified. So there are certain catch-all nets around that, Alan, that will stop that from happening. So it's in no one's interest that to happen time and time again, because we get to a point actually when the directors aren't trying to trade legitimately, they're doing something wrong, aren't they? Something's going very wrong. They're always doing it on purpose. And that's where the insolvency legislation kicks in and where the disqualification process kicks in as well. So they're the 2 points that pick up on your question. I hope that answers for you. Okay. So let's just go to the process quickly here. I won't spend too long this bit now. I've got about 9 minutes, but we're doing okay. We're doing okay. The timeline ultimately to be appointed can be considered the complexity of the situation. If there's some difficult assets to deal with, for example, assets in storage, assets on site, for example, there can be a bit of a longer process to understand, in fact, what is the appropriate process to go through, first of all, and is there a process necessary, but also what then is what steps need to take? Because, of course, once we're in as liquidator, and it's the same as administrator, we are responsible for stuff. So, we need to make sure we can pay for things, we can deal with things and take them forward. So, really important that we understand what we're going to go into, as well as we understand the situation for creditors, how it's going to impact creditors, how it's going to impact the company, directors, staff, of course, employees, very important in this process as well. Okay. If we go through, stick on the liquidation where we're at the moment, once we're appointed, quick liquidation in and out, possibly 3 to 6 months, investigation's done, nothing found in that situation, we move on from there. Investigation's done, more stuff to look into, and of course it can take longer if there's more things to investigate. Come back to the questions a minute ago. If we come across situations where it's a repeat offence, it's something that's actually been done fraudulently. The insolvency legislation, we're not going to get huge details in insolvency legislation. Insolvency legislation is a wonderfully simple thing. Okay, it says if the director's done something dodgy, there's going to be part of the insolvency legislation to allow us to deal with that. And for example, they've sold assets less than they're worth. They've paid their mates back, their family back, they've paid themselves back ahead of other creditors. They've not paid Hmrc back. All those factors, they're all there in the legislation to allow us to take certain powers to do things. Why insolvency practitioners have to be licensed, because actually the powers we have are really, really strong. And they are can be used to do things to recover assets, etc. So it's important. That's why it's important for us to have the conversations at the very beginning of a discussion with the director to understand what there is there and to raise them any concerns we may or may not have, to allow them to ask questions of us. What happened with this? What happened about that? And we need to be absolutely clear from the start that we all know what's going to happen going forward. Okay, and the more we can dig in those first conversations, the more we can be honest with ourselves and the client. We'll all know the situation will resolve much easier, because we don't like surprises. We don't like bad surprises. I'm sure directors don't like bad surprises. And I know creditors certainly don't like bad surprises. Okay, so the more we can understand, the more we can resolve the situation, the more informed we are. That's why those first calls, those first initial meetings can take some time, and they may go on for several meetings in some cases to make sure there's a full understanding on both sides in terms of what there is to happen to the company, but also what the directors are going to do, what will happen to them. So really important stuff. Move on to the next slide for a second. I mentioned insolvency practices evolve because it can't just be done by anyone, and that's because of these powers and that come with that, and the duties come with that, and the obligations that are upon the insolvency practitioners to do that. You may not have picked it before, but the insolvency practitioner is actually appointed as an individual. So FA Sims aren't appointed as insolvency practitioner. I am appointed as liquidator, and myself, Richard Sims, rather than being the company. Although I work for FA Sims and etc., but it's still myself as appointed as liquidator. Okay, so it's a very specific thing in that way it's done. That may change over time. There's certainly some consultations taking place about that. There's some discussions about how things will change going forward. But again, we're interested to see. I mean, I'm hoping if changes for always the better, hopefully, but we'll see what comes out from there. And ultimately, I probably won't have a big say in that. What I can do is express an opinion, I guess, as I have done previously. Okay. 5 minutes to go, guys. So I'll pop through these questions now. The point mentioned there is we've got this issue about the creditors have to look at the liquidation, the shareholders vote, the creditors have a vote. So nothing happens without the creditors being informed, that the shareholders being informed, the shareholders and the creditors have an opportunity to express an opinion, give a view, potentially ask for a meeting. There's a number of things that can happen there. So the policies and the process is very much set out within that as it goes through. Okay. And then we have to go through a process of realizing assets, so liquidating assets into cash funds. And we have to go through the process of basically reviewing what's happened in the company, making this director's conduct report I mentioned too. We have 3 months to do that. And then basically look at any transactions of concern, whether the directors will directors or whether the directors towards a third party, to make sure things are done fairly and no creditors have been prejudiced by the action of the company before liquidation taking place. Question from Mary. Hello, Mary. If there are insufficient funds in the company to pay the IP, what normally happens? Well, in that situation, Mary, the position is where that ultimately the insolvency practitioner probably wouldn't choose to take a case on as a liquidator, let's say with this position, unless they think they can at least cover their sort of minimum fee. And we'll come on to that fee might be a bit later on. In those situations, sometimes the director will stand up and pay, sometimes the director pays, or the shareholders pay to cover the cost to make sure it's dealt with, or it are left in a situation where it's forced then into this compulsory liquidation route I mentioned, where basically one of the creditors eventually forces them to liquidation. So it would be a conversation between ourselves and the director to see if there was no funds, is there means to potentially cover that cost. Okay, very important stuff. Thank you for asking the question. I'm guessing, Mary, you're the Mary that came on the chat earlier saying, good morning, good afternoon from sunny Scotland. So if it was you, I hope sunny Scotland is going well for you today. Fantastic. Okay. Let's look through here. That's okay. Just a few points to look out for here. We're just going to whip this through now. Look out for dividends. Dividends are, if from an insolvent company, is technically illegal. We may have to return a dividend, ask for a dividend to be returned. So look out for dividend process policies during that insolvent period. Dividends. Okay. Payments to connected parties, what we call associated parties. Parties could end up being reversed. Okay. Look out for overdrawn loan accounts, so effectively debtors to the company, their money owned back to the company. Wrongful trading, we talked about earlier. We talked about that little restriction that's been going through COVID to this minimise the liability of wrongful trading, but it's one of a list of things you can see here. Misuse of COVID-19 funding, again, we mentioned that a bit earlier on. Okay, bits to look out for from that side. Okay. Cost of a CVL, very, very sort of small CVL, a simple kind of limited number of creditors situation, looking around about 2,500 plus VAT, a few third-party costs. We will look at each one of those on an individual situation and do our best to make it work for the directors of the company in that position. So back to Mary's question, we'll do our best to make it workable for those directors in those positions. Okay. Administration, we'll talk about a bit here, and you'll see those that have been less in the press recently. They kind of jumped in the press a bit, perhaps early COVID, but been a bit less around about that recently. The administration you might see as being more for a big company. That's because it's more expensive. We do see administrations, of course, we do see, but they're not going to be for the bulk of our clients. The bulk of our clients are very small businesses, but not every one of them is, not every one of them is too small for administration. That makes sense. But those that need administration has to be a very specific set of circumstances, because again, it's a more expensive process to follow for us to do. Therefore, there needs to be more funds available. It serves certain purposes. It's something we'll always discuss with the cost of creditor and see what people think. So let's see what comes out from there, and see what the conversation. Just be aware it's an option. I wanted to cover much anything else to say really about this idea. What we've got, this free pack. You may have come across this in the press a lot about this need to again this process of lifting bits out of the company, putting into a new company, and that's where that's been pre-planned beforehand. That has come under more and more criticism in the last few years. There's a lot of restrictions on that, so it still exists, but it's something that needs to be looked at very carefully again. And because it requires more planning, it's more expensive. The process is more expensive as well. It's something to watch very carefully from that side. Okay. This stuff now, actually, this is largely finished now. This was on the last slide, so it was still live when we did the talk previously. That's all pretty much disappeared. Now, as mentioned before, just be aware that I mentioned about the wrongful trading stuff that was there. That was still relevant to that period of time, so that was important in that bit there. Okay. Commercial landlord stuff, we've mentioned that again. We've got this Commercial Rent Act now in place, so look out for that yourselves from that side. We'll just do just a couple of minutes just to wrap this bit up now. We'll call it a day. This mentioned before, you will have seen, those of you who've seen a client go through this process, the change in individuals when their businesses start facing difficulty is tremendous. They feel under so much pressure, and they go under so much pressure. So we have to be able to recognise that if we can do, and recognise them changing. They won't see themselves change so much, but those around them will do. And actually, it's almost easy. If you see them once every few months, you'll see those change more dramatically than someone sees them every day, because those changes every day are too subtle sometimes to be picked up on. So again, look out for how the impact it has on them. There's been a lot of talk about mental health during COVID-19, which of course is a big issue. But this has been a big issue for directors as well. The change, the businesses that have done well before have suddenly been ripped away from them, making it very difficult for them. Okay. Yeah, so big challenges there from that side. Just come back to my slides. And basically just say, how can we help? Do what we can. I mentioned about some fees and stuff, whatever we can do, but just any conversation, always happy to have a conversation, always happy to help out from there. I mentioned about the links below as well, because there's a couple of articles I want to link you to in there. There's a couple of links on the Insolvency Insights section there, the 2 articles I mentioned about the COVID stuff, how bad loan could be used, and how the changes in striking off rules have come through from there. And you'll see some other websites there that have various things. MLCC you're probably aware of. Many of you may use MLCC as well from that side. Just a very brief point. Hopefully, if any of you haven't seen yet, keep an eye out for the Economic Crime Act. You may have seen that coming through. Potentially has an impact of any of you who have clients with overseas companies owning those properties. Look out for that. We're going to put an article out on that very soon. So that's me done at this point in time. It's my chance to say thank you ever so much for joining me today. It's really kind of you all. Really enjoy you being here. I was saying, John, for at some point, one day, we'll get in front of everyone face to face and we'll have a proper debate about this stuff. But thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoy it. And I'll hand back to Jonathan. And thanks again, John. Thanks for the opportunity, IFA as well. Really appreciate the chance to speak today. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. A note to myself to make sure I plan more effectively moving forward. You've covered a lot over 2 sessions, and I'm sure I could have and should have given you a little bit more time. But what you've gone through today and in the end of February session, really insightful, really useful, very helpful. So thank you. If I'm listening this afternoon, I think everybody is aware, whether they're a business owner, professional, or an accountant, cash flow is key, is king. So anticipating what might happen further out, vitally important. Probably many of the members and accountants aware of the 2 tests that you alluded to or talked about. But it's something that you mentioned right near the very end. And I would reiterate this, not just because you've kindly talked this afternoon, but to any member and to their clients, getting help from an experienced professional if there are concerns, I think is a really vital point to take away from this session and the previous one. I think somebody like Richard, one of his colleagues, the support, the advice, if you like, the t-shirts, the war stories that they will have seen over the years can actually help and alleviate stress and probably pain for business owners. So very much getting in touch with somebody like Richard, talking to an experienced professional, really important. Richard, I didn't ask this before we sort of went live, but can we share the slides? And I asked that probably more importantly for the slide that's up in front of everybody now, some of the useful links and the content. Are we okay to do that? Or
what I'm going to do, Jonathan, I just noticed one little typo when I went through it.
Yep.
So I'll make that quick change and whip it over to the next half an hour, if that's okay.
All right, that's brilliant. We'll then get a recording and the revised slides over to attendees. So thank you very much indeed for that. Richard, it's always great for me to say thank you to any speaker, but it's actually more important, and I think it's more appropriate that some of the comments coming through from the attendees, many thank yous, somebody saying insightful like I did, so on behalf of the members and attendees, thank you very much indeed for your efforts and your time this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for the opportunity. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It's a real pleasure. I really do enjoy these. It's a real honour to have the chance to talk to you guys and how good you all are, what you do. So it's a real chance to real thank you for me to have the chance to talk to you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Before we go, and I'm virtually bringing this in on time, so we're doing okay. The next 60-minute UK webinar is on the 20th of April. 60 minutes, but it happens to be a 90-minute session. So I just wanted to make sure that anybody who's booked, thinking about booking, just put into your diary, it's a 90-minute session on cybersecurity awareness. So please just bear that in mind. CPD, you're here this afternoon. I've seen a number of names pop up, and you're here every time. You're investing in your CPT, your continual professional development. Please visit the Institute website, the CPD section, whether it be further webinars, international, UK, whether it be webinars being run by partners, whether it be the tax series, payroll webinars, the quarterly financial reporting updates, they're all there. Please do visit, register. Any queries, any questions, get in touch with myself or the events team. We're here to help. But Richard, again, thank you very much indeed. And to everybody who's joined us this afternoon, thank you for doing so. Have a good afternoon, have a good rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon. Stay well.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.